Now, North Korea appears to be preparing for a massive military parade upon the 75th anniversary of the ruling regime, the Rodong Party, which falls on Saturday. Now, despite signs that the dictatorship is grappling with the impact of COVID-19, severe flooding as well as economic sanctions, it seems that Pyongyang will continue its tradition of having thousands of troops goose-stepping across Kim Il-sung Square alongside their latest weapons. In fact, there's also speculation that the regime may be gearing up to launch an October surprise designed to send a message to countries around the world, namely the United States. Now, to discuss what we may see from the reclusive regime in the coming days and weeks, we connect with Soo Kim, policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and former analyst for the CIA. We also have Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, a career specialist and reader of international relations at King's College London. It's lovely to see both of you. Now, let's do ladies first. So, Soo, let's start with you. Do you think the impact of COVID-19 this year, it's going to compromise the scale of this year's October 10th event? I mean, what do you expect the regime to showcase?
So we've seen satellite imagery indicating movement in North Korea. The North Koreans have been making preparations at the medium parade training ground for the parade for months. And given that it's the 75th founding anniversary of the party, North Korea is obviously unlikely to backtrack or to overlook this important date, whether or not there's COVID. We saw a bunch of buildings pop up there for a short period of time. They're probably there to house trucks, tanks, and other vehicles. Some of these buildings also are also large enough to store multiple mobile missile launchers. So it might even be big enough to store perhaps a Hwasong-15 missile, for instance. The question, though, is what are they actually going to be showcasing? So we're guessing between two options, I think, but that's, of course, just based on what we know, what we've seen. So we're, on the one hand, we might be seeing an advanced solid fuel ICBM. This won't be anything entirely new in terms of optics, but it would be a concern still, since we've already seen the North Koreans demonstrate their competence with their land-based ICBMs. We could also see perhaps, once with the ability to deliver multiple reentry vehicles. This, of course, basically means that North Korea can expand the number of warheads they can deliver. It could also mean that the multiple chances of actually hitting the target. So this just means that it's going to be harder for countries like the United States to intercept these missiles. The South Koreans also have speculated that North Korea might be displaying a SLBM, for instance. This is also based on evidence of movement and cleanup that we've seen in the Shimpo shipyard. The movement, of course, could have been due to cleanup or reconfiguring the shipyard as a result of the floods and the typhoons. But this type of technology or capability would, of course, be more difficult and difficult for the United States to be able to track these missiles, of course. But I think the grand question is, to what extent is North Korea going to be willing to showcase this October surprise, especially in light of the COVID-19 crisis is one thing, but we just saw that the United States President Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. So that has basically shaken up a lot of our foundational, I guess, the playing set when it comes to dealing with North Korea and U.S. Domestic politics as well. So Kim Jong-un is going to have to calibrate and to really think about one, how much of an impact this is going to make in this stage, and two, how is the United States without a healthy president right now? How is the United States going to respond to a North Korean? Maybe not a direct provocation, but it is going to be showcasing and threatening the United States with what it would be able to do down the road.
Now, Ramon, as Soo has just mentioned, there have been multiple speculations surrounding a possible October surprise from North Korea, from conducting its first underwater ballistic missile test to another show of bromance between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. So are you expecting anything to happen? And also, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you're expecting to see from this massive military parade coming up.
Well, I would be surprised if anything happened between the U.S. and North Korea. Obviously, We have the COVID-19 case with President Trump. So North Korea has no incentive really to try out diplomacy, since it has been so paranoid and so concerned with COVID-19 cases getting into the country. So I think we can discount any high-level meeting. I mean, there have been an exchange of letters, obviously, as a result of the illness of President Trump, but I don't think we'll see more than that. Having said that, then the question would be, is there going to be a missile test, for example? And it has to be said that under Kim Jong-un, there has never been a October surprise in this way, right? We had the nuclear test, but that was in 2006, the first one in October. 2008, there was a missile launch, but that was under Kim Jong-il. And under Kim Jong-un, we have seen, in 2014, we saw exchange of fire in the DMZ and also in the NLL, right, in the Northern Limit line. But we haven't seen any missile test or nuclear test in October. So I think that it would be a break with tradition that wouldn't really make sense for North Korea right now because of all the problems that have been mentioned before. The country is suffering floodings, coronavirus. As far as we know, there have been cases inside the country. So I would be surprised, actually, if North Korea conducted the test because of these reasons. And there is another thing here, obviously, that we don't know who is going to win the election, whether it's going to be Biden or President Trump is going to win a second term. And I think, if anything, North Korea might try something after the election, but not before the election, and see what happens.
Right, so a lot of internal and external factors that North Korea is facing, giving it all the more reason to keep a low profile for quite a bit. Well, Ramon, South Korea's Lee-dong met with Stephen Biegun last week, and they apparently discussed creative ways to resume the long-stalled nuclear talks with Pyongyang. But do you think those talks can really regain that 2018 momentum?
I think they can, but not at the highest level, especially if Biden wins the election. I would be extremely surprised if Biden agreed to meet with Kim Jong-un, right, at a high-level summit between the two leaders of the two countries. This might come later on if there is an agreement, but I would be very surprised if this happens. And even under President Trump, I mean, we have seen that from his perspective, he has had some successes, for example, in the Middle East, with the normalization of diplomatic relations between Israel and a couple of Arab countries. This hasn't been the case with North Korea. So I would expect that even under President Trump, there will be, if he's reelected, we will have to wait a few months for diplomacy at the highest level to resume, if it actually resumes. I'm more confident to predict that there will be some sort of diplomacy regardless of who wins the election between North Korea and the US. And I would say, actually, that if Biden wins the election, we will see a proper diplomatic process with working level talks, eventually leading potentially to an agreement. And this would be more sustainable than that we have seen with Trump over the past 4 years. There has been a lot of talk about the three summits between the two leaders for good reasons, the three meetings between both of them. But there has been no substance to the process. And I think that Biden, if he wins the election, he would try to bring this substance. So I think that going back to 2018 might be possible, but probably not at the highest level like we saw back then.
And Sue, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think the top nuclear envoys really discussed, these creative approaches that they talked about? And also, what do we know about Joe Biden's approach to North Korea? Would he follow in Trump's footsteps of personally engaging with Kim Jong-un?
So I tend to generally agree with what Dr. Pacheco-Pardo just said about just the overall optics and our expectation when it comes to either a Trump #2 administration or a Biden administration. I think we've basically had a taste of the forbidden fruit that's called summitry without really seeing substantive outcomes from North Korea. I think the question is, we've had our lessons learned, and the question is, how much is the Biden administration going to be willing to take that that same step to lower the bar once again, to meet with the North Koreans without really getting anything substantive in return? I also think that whichever administration it is, whether it's a Trump administration or a Biden administration, the key thing is to craft an agile and adept policy, and that of course is going to be fully knowing the playing field of the North Koreans, to be able to come up with policy measures and responses that are not just preemptive, but of course fully knowing and really understanding where the North Koreans are coming from. And I think with that, whether we do pursue summits or working level meetings with the North Koreans or with the South Korean government, that should form the crux of our policy.
And now, Sue, getting to the killing of the South Korean civil servant recently, which did, of course, prompt outrage in Seoul and all over the world. Pyongyang apologized, according to President Moon Jae-in's office, saying that it was unintended. But it's fair to say that most actions or moves that the North Koreans make do tend to be calculated and executed to perfection. Do you think the killing was an accident? And why do you think Kim Jong-un even bothered to apologize this time around?
So I think there still remain a lot of questions about what exactly happened. And the questions and the suspicions, I think, come from both the North Korean response, of course, but also the South Korean handling ex post incident. So the North Koreans, of course, we keep hearing that they issued an apology when in fact it really wasn't. They sort of admitted to taking certain actions, but they did try to put the blame on the South Korean government for their confrontational behavior and their blasphemous attitude toward the North Koreans. So it wasn't really an apology, I would like to state. Also, the evidence seems to have been either destroyed or somehow doctored by the North Korean side. So we can't really go by what the North Koreans are saying, obviously. From the South Korean side, I would say that based on what we know from the media and the South Korean government's responses, it seems like there have been opportunities for the South Korean, the Marines and the police to actually examine and to respond to the incident when it happened, but they decided that they didn't because, of course, the North Korean responses were always in the back of their mind. So it's kind of bizarre, I think, how things are unraveling, and the fact that we're seeing that certain maybe quicker response measures could have been taken by the South Koreans, and we haven't seen that. As to whether or not we'll see like a joint investigation or a clear resolution of this issue, it's really skeptical, I would say, because of our understanding of North Koreans' past behavior when it comes to these border incidents and the killings of South Korean citizens, of course. So I think, again, the responses, I think, were perhaps not as commensurate as to the gravity and the scale and the implications of the incident. And I think that based on what we understand of the North-South dynamics as well, we might not really get closure from North Korea.
And Ramon, before you go, what is your take on the events that followed the murder of the South Korean public servant?
Well, I think there are two aspects to this. One of these, obviously, the North Korean soldiers' forces would have been following certain protocols. So from that perspective, you cannot say this is an accident. Now, you can say, obviously, that they couldn't have planned for a South Korean citizen being there, right? So this reminds me a little bit to what happened in 2008 with the killing of the South Korean tourists, where North Korean soldiers, as far as we know, they were following protocols, but obviously they wouldn't have expected the behavior from the South Korean tourist. I'm not blaming the South Korean side, obviously, in this case, but what I'm trying to say is that the North Koreans will follow these protocols, but they don't know that this incident would actually happen. Now, having said that, I think, and I agree with what has been said, I think that there is going to be no real closure to the situation. If we look at the killing of the South Korean tourist in 2008, there has been no closure, really. I mean, back then, I think there wasn't even an acknowledgement from North Korea they had done something wrong. They were basically blaming the tourist, they were blaming the South Korean policy. Now, in this instance, it has been a semi-apology. I agree that this is not a full apology. But we should also say that if you look at the statement issued by North Korea, there is an element of blaming South Korea, which is what North Korea has done throughout history, really. So there is a semi-apology, but there is no full closure. And I would be surprised that unless North Korea feels that they really have to engage with South Korea to be able to get an agreement, a proper agreement with the U.S., I think that North Korea won't follow through on what the South Korean government has asked, which is a joint investigation.
Well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the discussion today, but thank you both so much for joining us. That was Sue Kim, Policy Analyst at RAND Corporation, and Dr. Raymond Checo-Pardo, a Korea Specialist and Reader of International Relations at King's College London. Thank you again both so much for joining us from Washington and London, especially from London, where it's almost 1 a.m. in the morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time here in South Korea. Hope you join us then. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.